Have you ever met someone who seems to remain steady no matter what life throws at them? They experience loss, disappointment, unexpected setbacks, stress at work, relationship struggles, even financial pressure. And while none of those things are easy, they don't seem to completely unravel. Now, compare that to someone else, someone whose life feels like a roller coaster. Everything's fine one week, then a difficult conversation, unexpected expense, or just one bad day, and suddenly everything feels like it's falling apart. So, what's the difference? Are some people just simply born more resilient? Are they mentally stronger? Or do they have better genetics? No, I don't believe that's the answer. In fact, after years of watching people through adversity, I've noticed something interesting. The people who seem the strongest during life's biggest storms usually weren't built during the storm. They were built before it ever arrived. And that's what today's conversation is all about.
All right. Hey, let's pause for a second. One of the things I love most is helping people discover what's holding them back, but then walking with them as they create this meaningful change in their lives. It's the reason I do what I do. If you've been enjoying the content and you're looking for more personalized guidance, I do offer coaching programs that help people gain clarity, build resilience, and just take those practical steps toward the life that they want. And for those of you who prefer learning at your own schedule, I do have a self-study course that's available so you can work through it at your own pace. You can learn more about it at coachbo.com. But for now, let's jump back in the video because we've got a lot of important ground to cover still.
Because the next step is in the resilient method is nurture resilience daily. Not weekly, not occasionally, not only when life starts falling apart, but daily. Because resilience isn't something that you suddenly discover when life gets hard. It's something that you intentionally build long before you ever need it. Think about a professional athlete for a moment. When do they prepare for the championship? Is it the night before? Of course not. They prepare every ordinary day leading up to it. And that's the practices that nobody watches, the workouts that nobody applauds, the healthy meals, the recovery, the discipline. The championship simply reveals what the daily habits have already built. And life works exactly the same way. The difficult moments in life don't create resilience, they reveal it. And that's an important distinction because many people spend their entire lives waiting until they're overwhelmed. They're waiting until they're exhausted. They're waiting until their marriage is struggling, waiting until anxiety takes over, waiting until burnout forces them to slow down before they finally decide, I should probably start caring for myself. But by then, they're trying to build resilience from the bottom of a hole instead of building it while they're standing on the solid ground. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you intentionally invested in your own resilience? Not because you were overwhelmed or your life was falling apart or because someone told you to, but simply because you understood that becoming stronger is something that you practice. See, most people struggle to answer that question. And honestly, I don't blame them because nobody really teaches us this. We're taught how to make money, build careers, fix things around the house, be more productive, chase success. But very few people ever teach us how to strengthen the one person that we're going to spend every single day with. That's ourselves. And yet, that relationship, it influences everything else. The way we lead, parent, love, solve problems, handle disappointment, how you show up for your people around you. See, everything flows from the condition of the person within, which means if you neglect yourself long enough, eventually everything connected to you begins to feel the effects. Here's something else I've noticed after hundreds of conversations with people. Nobody plans to become emotionally exhausted. Nobody wakes up on a Monday morning and says, you know what? I'd really like to burn out over the next 6 months. Nobody says, I hope I slowly lose my patience with everyone I love. And nobody hopes I'd like to become anxious, disconnected, and just completely overwhelmed. It doesn't happen that way. Burnout rarely happens all at once. It happens one neglected day at a time. The attitude of I'll deal with it later. Well, until one day later finally arrives and you realize you've been surviving instead of living. You've been reacting instead of leading, and you've been enduring instead of growing. That's why nurturing resilience daily matters, because resilience isn't about preparing for one difficult day. It's about becoming the kind of person who can consistently navigate difficult seasons. I want you to think about resilience like a muscle. Nobody accidentally becomes physically strong. Strength is built through repeated resistance. One workout doesn't transform the body, but hundreds of them do. The exact same principle applies to your emotional, mental, relational, and spiritual resilience. One encouraging conversation won't change your life. One morning prayer won't transform your thinking. And one healthy decision won't suddenly make you resilient. But thousands of small, intentional daily choices absolutely will. That's why I often tell people your life is rarely changed by one massive decision. It's changed by the small decisions that you make over and over and over again. Those decisions eventually become habits, and those habits become patterns, and those patterns become your lifestyle. And eventually, your lifestyle becomes your identity. So when people say, I just want to become a more resilient person, well, I gently challenge them because resilience isn't something that you become overnight. It's something that you nurture every single day. Now, here's the problem. Most of us have been taught to treat resilience like it's an emergency tool, something that we pull off the shelf when life gets hard. But imagine owning a fire extinguisher, never learning how to use it until your house was already on fire. You'd probably wish that you had practiced beforehand, right? Well, resilience works the same way. The habits that you build today are going to determine how you'll respond tomorrow. That's why your daily life matters so much. The ordinary Tuesday, the quiet Wednesday morning, the uneventful Saturday afternoon, those moments may seem insignificant, but they're actually where resilience is quietly being formed, not in front of crowds or during the big breakthrough or during inspirational weekends, but in the ordinary rhythms that nobody else really sees. And honestly, there's something incredibly freeing about that because it means that you don't have to wait for some huge life change to begin becoming stronger. You can start today with one intentional choice, then another, then another. So the question becomes, how do we actually do that? How do we intentionally nurture resilience without adding another overwhelming checklist to our lives? Well, I'd like to share a framework that I personally found incredibly helpful. I call it the 3 R's of daily resilience. There are 3 intentional practices that help you stay emotionally grounded, mentally clear, physically restored, and connected to the person that you're becoming. So let's start with the first R. It's reset. If I were to ask you, what do you normally do when you begin feeling overwhelmed? How would you answer? Maybe you push through it. Maybe you isolate. Maybe you become short with people. Maybe you distract yourself. Maybe you bury yourself in work. Maybe you scroll social media. Maybe you eat. Maybe you simply pretend that everything's okay. The reality is, we all have default responses. So the question isn't whether you have one, the question is whether it's actually helping you. Because here's what I know. One of the greatest myths about resilient people is that they don't experience difficult emotions. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. Resilient people absolutely feel fear, disappointment, frustration, grief, anxiety, stress. They're human. The difference isn't that they don't experience those emotions. The difference is they've learned how to process them instead of allowing those emotions to process them. That's what a reset is. A reset isn't pretending you're okay or suppressing your emotions. It isn't stuffing everything down until you eventually explode. A reset is intentionally slowing down long enough to recognize what's happening inside of you before it begins controlling everything around you. Have you ever noticed how quickly emotions can snowball? Maybe something frustrating happens at work, you don't deal with it, you carry it home, then someone in your family says something completely innocent, but because you're already emotionally overloaded, you snap. Now you've created tension at home. Then you feel guilty about how you responded, and now you're carrying this frustration, this guilt, all because one emotion was never acknowledged. We've all been there. And that's why a daily reset matters, because when emotions go unprocessed, they don't disappear, they accumulate. Think of it like carrying rocks in a backpack. One rock, it's not that heavy. Neither is 2 or 3. They keep adding rocks, and eventually that weight becomes exhausting. And most people don't realize, but they're carrying emotional backpacks filled with yesterday's disappointments, last week's stress, last month's conflict, old regrets, unspoken hurt, unresolved fear. No wonder they feel exhausted. They've never stopped long enough to take the backpack off. A daily reset gives you permission to do exactly that. Now, let me tell you something that changed the way I think about emotions. Emotions are incredible messengers, but they're terrible managers. They're designed to tell you something, not control you. So fear might be telling you, pay attention. Anger, it might be telling you a boundary has been crossed. Sadness might be reminding you that something meaningful has been lost. Stress, it might simply be telling you you've been carrying too much for too long. Those emotions have value, but they were never meant to become the decision makers. Because when emotions take the driver's seat, good decisions usually don't follow. That's why resilient people pause before they proceed. They create space between what happened and how they respond. And inside that space, that's where they regain perspective. So, how do you actually practice a daily reset? It doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the simpler it is, the more likely you'll actually do it. For me, a reset begins with slowing down. Sometimes that's sitting quietly with a cup of coffee before the day begins. Sometimes it's stepping outside and taking a deep breath, looking at the trees, feeling the sun on my face. A lot of the times for me, it's opening my Bible or it's prayer. And sometimes it's simply asking myself, what am I carrying today? Notice something. None of those things are complicated because a reset isn't about doing something impressive. It's about becoming present. Here's a coaching exercise I often give people. At least once every day, pause, even if it's for only 2 minutes, and ask yourself 3 simple questions. What am I feeling right now? And just name it. Research has shown that simply identifying what you're feeling can help you reduce its intensity. When you put words to an emotion, you begin moving from reacting automatically to responding intentionally. And the second question, why am I feeling this? Not what happened, but what's underneath it. Am I tired? Am I disappointed? Am I carrying unrealistic expectations? Did something happen earlier today that I'm still holding on to? Get curious. Then ask the third question. What's the healthiest response I can choose next? Not what's my emotion telling me to do, but what's the wisest response? Those are 2 very different questions. Resilience isn't built by avoiding emotion. It's built by responding wisely to emotion. That's emotional intelligence. Another thing I've learned over the years is that most emotional reactions are actually delayed responses. They're rarely about the moment that you're currently in. They're often connected to something you never dealt with yesterday or last week or even years ago. That's why daily resets are so powerful. They keep emotional debt from piling up. Imagine if every day you cleaned your house just a little. Well, you'd rarely need an overwhelming deep clean, wouldn't you? Well, the same principle applies to emotionally. Daily emotional maintenance, it's going to prevent emotional collapse. And here's what I want you to hear. You don't earn extra points for carrying more than you were designed to carry. Some people wear exhaustion like it's a badge of honor. I'm just pushing through. I'll deal with it later. I don't have time. Can I lovingly challenge that? You don't have time not to. Because if you never make time to reset, eventually life will force you to. Through burnout, through anxiety, through broken relationships, through health, or through emotional exhaustion. I'd rather choose a daily pause than have life eventually demand a complete stop. So here's your challenge starting today. Build one intentional reset into every single day. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It doesn't have to be 10. Start with whatever you can consistently sustain. And then sit quietly, pray, journal, talk, take a walk, read scripture, practice deep breathing, whatever helps you reconnect with clarity, truth, and perspective. Because remember, resilience isn't built by pretending that you're never overwhelmed. It's built by learning how to regularly return to the person that you truly want to become. Now, the second R may actually surprise you because it's something our culture desperately needs but rarely values, and that's refuel. Let me ask you an honest question. When was the last time you felt truly restored? Not distracted, not entertained, not temporarily checked out, but genuinely restored. See, for a lot of people, that's actually a difficult question to answer because somewhere along the way, we started confusing escape with recovery. And those are 2 very different things. You can escape without ever recovering. For instance, you can sit in front of a television for 3 hours and still feel emotionally exhausted. You can spend hours scrolling social media and somehow you feel more drained than when you started. And you can distract yourself all weekend long, only to wake up Monday morning feeling just as empty as you did on Friday. Why? Because distraction isn't the same thing as restoration. Just because something helps you escape doesn't mean it helps you recover. And I think that's one of the biggest lies our culture has quietly accepted. We have more ways to entertain ourselves than any point in history. Yet so many people are emotionally exhausted, they're mentally overwhelmed, they're spiritually disconnected, and they're just physically depleted. That should tell you something. Entertainment by itself isn't enough. Here's an illustration I often use. Think about your cell phone. It doesn't matter how expensive it was, how advanced the technology is, or how many incredible features it has. If you never plug it into a charger, eventually the battery dies. Now imagine looking at your phone and saying, "Come on, just try harder." Well, that sounds ridiculous because we understand the problem isn't effort, the problem is energy. Yet, that's exactly what many people will do to themselves. They keep demanding more effort while giving themselves less recovery. They wake up tired, they push through the day, they come home exhausted. Or they stay up too late trying to decompress, wake up tired again, and they just repeat the cycle over and over and over. Eventually, the body says, "I can't keep doing this," and resilience begins to disappear. And it's not because the person's weak, it's because they've been running on empty. Now, I want you to think about this. You cannot continuously pour out without intentionally pouring back in. Every relationship teaches us, every bank account teaches us, every battery teaches us, nature teaches us, even seasons teach us this. There's a time to produce and there's a time to recover. Neither one is weakness, but both are absolutely necessary. The healthiest people I've ever met are not people who never get tired. They're people who know how to recover well. See, that's a huge difference. So let me coach you through something. Instead of asking yourself, "What helps me relax?" try asking a different question. What actually restores me? Because those two are not always the same thing. Relaxation is wonderful, but restoration is transformational. Because restoration leaves you with more than you started with, it gives something back. So, what actually restores you? For some people, it's spending quiet time with God. For others, it's getting outside in creation, going on a hike, fishing, working in the garden, exercising, reading, laughing with family, having meaningful conversations, right? Creating something, listening to worship music, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. Whatever it is for you, pay attention to the activities that leave you feeling more alive, not just less busy. You have to figure out that difference. Imagine two buckets. One bucket represents everything that drains you: the stress, conflict, deadlines, difficult conversations, responsibilities, loss, unexpected challenges. Every single day, something is being poured into that bucket. Now, imagine another bucket. This one represents everything that fills you: peace, purpose, rest, healthy relationships, prayer, exercise, time in nature, joy, gratitude. Here's the question: which bucket are you filling more consistently? Because if you're constantly adding to the bucket that drains you and really filling the one that restores you, it's only a matter of time before you feel empty. And just know that that's not failure, that's simply how we're designed. One of the healthiest habits I've ever developed is asking myself one simple question every evening: what gave me energy today? Not what entertained me, not what distracted me, not what generally gave me life. Then I ask another question: what drained me today? So over time, you begin noticing patterns. You discover certain conversations energize you, while certain environments exhaust you. You discover certain habits restore you, and certain routines slowly wear you down. That awareness becomes incredibly valuable because once you know what fills your tank, you can intentionally build more of that into your life. Now, let's be honest for a minute. Some of you are probably thinking, "Well, that sounds great, but I don't have time." I understand that feeling. Life gets busy. There are responsibilities, kids, work, appointments, people dependent on you. But I can gently challenge that thinking. You don't find time, you make time. You make it for the things that you believe are important. The truth is, if you don't intentionally create moments of restoration, life will eventually create them for you. And that will be through burnout, through illness, through emotional exhaustion, through strained relationships. I don't know about you, but I'd much rather choose intentional recovery than be forced into recovery. Here's another thought, too. Rest isn't something that you earn, it's something that you steward. Sometimes people believe I'll rest after I finish everything. Well, can I let you on a little secret? Everything is never finished. There will always be another email, another project, another responsibility, another demand. If your standard is I'll recover when life slows down, you'll spend most of your life waiting. See, resilient people don't wait for life to slow down. They intentionally build rhythms of restoration into busy seasons because they understand that recovery isn't a reward, it's a preparation. It prepares you to love well, to lead well, to think clearly, to handle adversity, to show up as the person that you want to become. So here's another challenge. Identify 3 things that genuinely restore you, not distract you, restore you. Then intentionally schedule them, just like you would any other important appointment. Protect them. Because here's what I've learned. Healthy people don't accidentally stay healthy. They build lives that make health sustainable. And resilient people don't accidentally remain resilient. They intentionally refuel long before they're running on empty. Now, we've talked about resetting our emotions. We've talked about restoring our energy, but there's one more piece. And I honestly believe it may be the most important one of all. Because every single day, the world's trying to tell you who you are. That's why the third R is reaffirm. If I had to choose one practice that has the potential to change the direction of someone's life more than almost anything else, it would be this. Because every single day, whether you realize it or not, someone or something is trying to tell you who you are. Your mistakes try to define you. Your success tries to define you. Your failure, your fears, other people's opinions, social media, your past, your circumstances, even your own inner critic, they all compete for one thing. That's your identity. And here's why that matters. Because you'll almost always live in alignment with who you believe you are. Think about that for a moment. If someone believes I'm just lazy, they'll find evidence to support it. If someone believes I always quit, guess what they'll eventually do? They'll quit. If someone believes I'm not good enough, they'll unknowingly make decisions that reinforce that belief. Our beliefs become filters, and those filters shape our behaviors, which is why resilience isn't just about changing your habits. It's about protecting your identity. One of the many great lessons I've learned is that your identity is either being built intentionally or it's being assigned accidentally. There really isn't much middle ground. If you don't intentionally remind yourself of who you're becoming, the world will gladly tell you who you should believe you are. And that's why every resilient person needs a daily practice of reaffirmation. Not empty positive thinking, not pretending life is perfect. I'm talking about intentionally reconnecting with your values, your purpose, your beliefs, your identity, because clarity creates consistency. When you know who you are, your decisions become much easier. For me, reaffirmation begins with asking myself a few simple questions like, who do I want to be today? Not what do I want to accomplish? No, who do I want to become? Because becoming always lasts longer than achieving. Achievements, they come and go. Identity, that stays with you. And then I ask, what do I value most? Is it integrity? Is it compassion? Possibly discipline? How about faith? Maybe service, maybe growth. Because if I don't intentionally remember my values, it's easy to let my emotions make decisions. And emotions, as we discussed, change by the hour. It's the values that stay steady. So finally, I remind myself of the purpose. Why am I doing what I'm doing? Who am I trying to impact? What kind of legacy am I trying to leave? See, purpose has a remarkable way of shrinking today's frustrations because when you remember your why, you become less distracted by temporary discomfort. There's a quote I love that says, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. It's simple, but incredibly profound because life has a way of pulling us away from what matters most. That's why reaffirmation isn't something that you do once, it's something that you practice every single day. Now, let me share something that I've seen happen over and over again in coaching. People often think that confidence comes first, then action follows, but that's actually backwards. Identity shapes action, and action reinforces identity, and confidence is ran from that stance. Every time that you choose to live according to your values, even when it's difficult, you're casting another vote for the person that you're becoming. Every healthy decision, conversation, moment of discipline, act of forgiveness, every boundary that you keep, every commitment you honor says, "This is who I am." Not because you say it, but because you're living it. And over time, that repeated evidence builds confidence, not fake confidence, earned confidence. The kind that says, "I trust myself because I watched myself continue showing up." That's resilience. Now, let me bring all this together. We've talked about reset, refuel, and reaffirm. 3 simple practices that don't require extraordinary talent. They don't require more money, more education, or perfect circumstances. They simply require intention. Imagine what happens when you, every single day, you pause long enough to process your emotions, you intentionally refill your energy, and you reconnect with your identity and your purpose. Day after day, week after week, month after month, do you think that person will handle adversity differently? Absolutely. Because resilience wasn't quietly being built, or was quietly being built long before adversity ever arrived. Which brings me to something I call the 10-minute rule. One of the biggest excuses I hear is, "I just don't have enough time." Can I encourage you? You don't need another hour, you need another habit. If you invested just 10 intentional minutes every single day into your resilience, your life would look dramatically different a year from now. Think about that. Just 10 minutes. That's less time than most people spend scrolling social media, waiting in line, or watching commercials. 10 intentional minutes could include 3 minutes of prayer, 3 minutes of journaling, 4 minutes of reading something that strengthens your thinking. Or maybe 10 uninterrupted minutes of walking while reflecting, breathing, and reconnecting with God. The specific activity isn't nearly as important as the consistency, because small, consistent, intentional actions always outperform occasional, motivated, intense efforts. It's true in fitness, it's true in relationships, it's true in business, and it's certainly true in resilience. I want you to imagine 2 people. One person spends 3 hours at a personal growth conference once a year. They leave inspired, they're excited, they're motivated, but 6 weeks later, right back to where they started. Now, the other person invests 10 minutes, 10 intentional minutes every single morning for an entire year. Who do you think experiences greater transformation? It's not even close, because inspiration only starts change. Consistency, that's what sustains it. So we'll see if you're up to it. Starting tomorrow, create your own 10-minute resilient ritual. Make it realistic, though. Make it simple and make it repeatable. Remember, you're not trying to change your life in one day. You're trying to change the direction of every day, because eventually direction will determine destination. Here's my final thought. The life you'll be able to handle tomorrow is and always will be determined by the resilience that you build today. Don't wait for life to force you to become stronger. Choose to become stronger before you have to. That's what resilient people do. They don't prepare during the storm. They prepare before the clouds ever appear. So, hey, if this video encouraged you, I hope you'll subscribe, because in our final video of the Resilient Method course, we're going to talk about the letter T, which is trust the process. And I believe this is the perfect way to end the series, because what happens when you're doing all the right things, you're showing up, you're building the new habits, you're nurturing resilience every day, but it still feels like nothing's changing. Well, how do you stay committed when progress feels invisible? How do you keep believing when growth seems painfully slow? That's exactly what we're going to unpack, because the greatest transformation in life never happened overnight. They happen one faithful step at a time. All right, I'll see you in the next video.